Daniel Carter was just an ordinary man living in a small town on Earth. An engineer by trade, he spent most of his days fixing machines and solving problems no one else wanted to deal with. His life was quiet, predictable, and free of excitement until the day the sky lit up. It began with a loud hum, deep and vibrating, as though the earth itself was groaning. Daniel, crouched under an old generator he was repairing, felt the ground tremble. He stood up and wiped the grease from his hands, staring in confusion as people outside ran into the streets. Looking up, when he stepped outside, he froze. A massive alien ship hovered above the town. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, sleek, dark, and pulsing with a strange, glowing light that seemed alive. It cast a shadow so large it covered half the town. People screamed and scattered, hiding in their homes or fleeing toward the hills. But Daniel didn't move. He wasn't scared, just confused. What did they want? Why here? The answer came quickly. A beam of light shot down from the ship, landing right in the middle of the town square. When the light faded, Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Standing there were three towering aliens. They were humanoid in shape but unmistakably alien, with silver skin that shimmered like liquid metal and eyes that glowed faintly blue. They wore ornate armor, detailed with symbols and patterns that looked ancient and regal. The tallest of the three stepped forward, scanning the crowd of terrified humans. Its eyes stopped on Daniel. For a moment, no one moved. Then the alien pointed a long, clawed finger at him and said in a deep, commanding voice, "You, step forward." Daniel blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. The alien pointed again. "Step forward, human." The crowd turned to look at him. Whispers spread through the gathering like wildfire. Daniel's chest tightened. Why him? What did they want? Reluctantly, he stepped forward. "I don't know who you think I am, but I think there's been a mistake," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The alien ignored his protest and gestured to the other two, who stepped forward and grabbed Daniel by the arms. He struggled, but their strength was unbelievable. "Hey, let me go," he shouted, but it was no use. "You have been chosen," the tall alien declared. "The Queen demands your presence." The Queen? Daniel's mind spun. What Queen? Why him? None of this made sense. Before he could say another word, a beam of light surrounded him and the aliens. He felt his body being lifted, weightless and helpless. In a flash, he was pulled into the alien ship, leaving behind his quiet, predictable life. Inside, the ship's halls were vast and glowing, filled with an eerie hum. The aliens led him down a long corridor to an enormous door. It slid open, and Daniel was pushed inside. Sitting on a grand throne was the alien queen herself. She was tall and imposing, her silver skin glowing brighter than the others, her gaze sharp and piercing. "You've finally returned to me," she said, her voice both commanding and soft, as though she had waited centuries for this moment. "My long-lost husband." Daniel stared at her, his mind reeling. Husband? What was she talking about? He had never seen her before in his life. Daniel couldn't believe what he was hearing. Husband. He stared at the alien queen, her silver skin shimmering in the soft glow of the room. Her piercing blue eyes seemed to look right through him, as if she were searching for something hidden deep within his soul. "I think there's been some kind of mistake," Daniel said, his voice shaky but firm. "I'm just an engineer. I don't know who you are, and I'm definitely not your husband." The queen rose gracefully from her throne, her tall figure towering over him. She moved with an air of authority, her ornate robes flowing behind her, as though carried by an invisible wind. "You may not remember, but I know who you are," she said, her tone calm but filled with certainty. "You are Carol, my consort, my bondmate. You once stood by my side and protected this empire." Daniel frowned. Cairo. The name sounded alien, completely foreign. He shook his head. "I think you've got the wrong guy. My name is Daniel Carter, and I've never left Earth, let alone been part of whatever this is." The Queen tilted her head, studying him closely. "Do you not recognize me? Do you not feel it?" she asked softly, taking a step closer. "The bond we shared was unbreakable, a connection forged through fire and war. Even now, I can sense the echoes of your soul. You are Caro." Daniel took a step back, feeling the weight of her words pressing down on him. He didn't know what she was talking about, but there was something unsettling about her confidence. Her voice carried a strange power, as if she believed it so strongly that it was almost convincing. "I don't feel anything," Daniel replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I'm just a human. I don't know anything about your empire or this bond." The Queen frowned, her expression softening into one of sorrow. She raised her hand, revealing a strange glowing pendant around her neck. It pulsed faintly with light, as though it were alive. "This pendant was a gift from you," she said. "It responds to your presence." As she held it out, the glow became brighter, its light spreading across the room. Daniel felt a strange sensation in his chest, like a faint pull, but he shook it off. "That doesn't prove anything," he said quickly, though his voice faltered. The Queen sighed. "You were injured in the final battle," she explained. "You disappeared, and I thought I had lost you forever. But now you are here, returned to me. I cannot believe it is mere coincidence." Before Daniel could argue further, the massive doors behind him opened, and a group of alien advisors entered. They glanced at him, their expressions ranging from shock to suspicion. One of them, a stern-looking alien with golden armor, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, are you certain this human is him?" he asked, his tone doubtful. The Queen stood tall, her voice unwavering. "I am certain. He is Caro." The advisors exchanged uneasy looks. Daniel felt his stomach drop. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he was certain of one thing. He was now part of something far bigger than himself, and there was no escape. As the advisors began their whispered arguments, the Queen turned back to Daniel. "You may not remember now," she said softly, "but you will. I will help you remember." Her eyes gleamed with determination. "And together, we will face the challenges ahead, just as we did before." Daniel had no idea what challenges she was talking about, but he knew one thing. His quiet, predictable life was gone forever. Daniel sat in silence, his mind spinning. The alien queen, Serathia, was looking at him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. She truly believed he was someone else, her long-lost husband, Caro. But it wasn't possible. He had never been off Earth, never met any aliens before today. How could she be so sure? "I don't know what you expect from me," Daniel finally said, his voice low but firm. "I'm not Caro. I'm just a man from Earth. You've made a mistake." Serathia shook her head. "The soul does not lie," she said. "You may not remember, but your essence, your presence, it is the same." Daniel sighed. "And what if I never remember? What then?" The Queen's expression darkened, and for the first time, Daniel saw something behind her regal confidence. "Pain. Then I have truly lost you," she whispered, more to herself than to him. The tension in the air was heavy. The advisors, still standing nearby, exchanged glances. Some looked concerned, others suspicious. One of them, a tall alien with glowing violet eyes, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, if he does not recall his past, then perhaps he is not Caro," he said carefully. "Perhaps he is merely a look-alike." Serathia turned to face the advisor, her gaze sharp. "Then how do you explain the pendant's reaction?" she challenged. The advisor hesitated. "There could be other explanations," he admitted. "But if he is truly Caro, then he should be able to prove it." Daniel frowned. "Prove it how?" The advisor glanced at Serathia before speaking. "There is a way to awaken lost memories," he said. "A test, a connection to the past." Daniel didn't like the sound of that. "And what exactly does this test involve?" The queen stepped closer to him, her presence both commanding and strangely warm. A relic exists in the heart of my palace. It is called the ethereal diadem, a crown that only the true consort of the queen may touch. If you are Caro, it will recognize you. If you are not, she paused, her gaze steady, it will reject you. Daniel swallowed hard. That didn't sound dangerous, but something told him this wasn't as simple as it seemed. And what happens if it rejects me? Tirithia hesitated. It has never rejected anyone before, she admitted. But the crown is alive in its own way. It may do something. Something, Daniel repeated. That's not exactly reassuring. The queen stepped even closer, so close that he could see the intricate details of her silver-blue skin. If you are truly not Caro, then I will not force you to stay, she promised. But if the diadem recognizes you, then you must accept the truth. Daniel took a deep breath. He had no reason to believe he was this Caro person. But if this test could finally prove to everyone, including himself, that he was just an ordinary man, then maybe he could go home. Fine, he said. Let's do it. The queen nodded, but there was something in her eyes. Hope. It made Daniel uneasy. As the guards led him toward the relic chamber, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change forever. The journey to the heart of the palace was long, and Daniel couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He still didn't understand what was happening. All he knew was that he had somehow been dragged into a world far beyond anything he had ever imagined. The glowing corridors of the alien ship seemed endless, stretching out before him like something out of a dream or a nightmare. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion. What was this ethereal diadem supposed to prove? If it rejected him, what would happen? Would he be thrown into the void of space, or worse, would it unlock memories that would tie him forever to this strange queen and her empire? Daniel glanced at Tirithia, walking beside him. Despite the overwhelming circumstances, there was something about her that tugged at him. Her presence was regal, sure, but there was also an underlying sadness in her eyes. She seemed certain of who he was, and that certainty was unsettling. Do you ever doubt? Daniel asked suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. Tirithia looked at him with a soft expression. Doubt? She repeated, as if the word itself was foreign. I am the queen of my people. I cannot afford doubt. My people need me to lead with conviction. She paused. But I do not doubt you, Caro. Daniel shook his head. I'm not Caro. You have the wrong person. Tirithia's gaze softened, but her voice remained firm. You will see. The diadem will show you the truth. They arrived at a large chamber deep inside the palace. The room was empty except for a tall pedestal in the center. Resting on it was a magnificent crown, unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. It gleamed with otherworldly light, its intricate design etched with symbols that seemed to move and change when he looked away. This is it, Tirithia said, her voice low with reverence. The ethereal diadem. Daniel stepped forward slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was eerily quiet, and the crown seemed to hum with energy, as if it was aware of his presence. He reached out, hesitating for a moment, before placing his hand on the cool metal. For a moment, nothing happened. Daniel waited, his breath held, but the crown remained still. Then, a sudden pulse of light shot from the diadem, surrounding Daniel's hand. The energy felt warm at first, but then it grew hot, almost painful. He pulled his hand back, but the light followed, wrapping around his wrist like a chain. The crown began to glow brighter, and in that moment, everything changed. Flashes of images bombarded his mind, alien landscapes, stars and galaxies spinning in the void, and a figure that he knew was him, standing beside Tirithia. His heart raced as the images intensified, but then, just as quickly as it had started, it stopped. Daniel staggered back, gasping for breath. The images were gone, replaced by a deep sense of confusion. The crown's glow faded, leaving only the faint hum that filled the room. Herethia stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "Do you remember now?" she asked softly. Daniel shook his head, his mind spinning. I don't know what that was," he muttered. The visions had been so vivid, so real, but they didn't make sense. Herethia's eyes searched his face, as if she were looking for something. Finally, she sighed. "The diadem has not rejected you," she said quietly. "But it does not mean that you have fully awakened your memories." Daniel's chest tightened. What did that mean? If the diadem hadn't rejected him, why couldn't he remember? And if he couldn't remember, what would he do now? The silence in the room was heavy, and Daniel felt a growing unease. Just then, the door to the chamber slammed open. A tall alien with golden armor entered, his face stern and distrustful. "Your Majesty," the alien said, bowing slightly. "I regret to inform you that the Council demands answers. The people are growing restless. They question your judgment in bringing this human to our side." Herethia's expression hardened, and she turned to face the new arrival. "They will have their answers," she said firmly, "but I will not be swayed by their doubts. I believe in him." The alien gave a curt nod, but Daniel could see the doubt in his eyes. The tension in the room was palpable. He wasn't just a man caught in a strange alien empire. Now he was a symbol of something much bigger, a question, an unknown. And no matter what Herethia believed, he wasn't sure he was ready to answer it. The chapter ended with the weight of expectation growing heavier on his shoulders. The tension in the palace was thick. Daniel could feel it in the air as he walked through the grand halls, his mind still reeling from the strange experience with the ethereal diadem. The images, the flashes of memories, none of it made sense. Yet he could still feel something stirring deep inside him, something he couldn't explain. The crown had not rejected him, but it had not given him the answers he desperately needed either. Herethia had insisted that they would deal with the unrest among her people later, but Daniel could sense that the storm was only just beginning. The whispers among the palace guards, the way the advisors avoided eye contact, it was clear that there was growing doubt about his presence here. Some of them feared he was an imposter, others simply didn't trust him. But no one dared to openly question the queen. Herethia had led him to a private chamber where they could discuss the situation in peace. But as she spoke, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He hadn't noticed it before, but now he saw it clearly. The uneasy looks that passed between Herethia and her closest advisors. The room seemed darker somehow, as though it was hiding secrets just out of reach. "You have proven yourself, Caro," Herethia said, her voice soft but strong. "But there is still much for you to remember. The people are beginning to question your return, and the council is divided. They want answers." Daniel crossed his arms, feeling more frustrated than ever. "I can't give them answers. I don't even remember who I am in this place. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on." Herethia stepped closer to him, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "I understand," she said quietly, "but there is more at play here than you realize." Before Daniel could respond, there was a loud knock on the door. One of Herethia's guards entered, bowing slightly. "Your Majesty," the guard said, "we have received word of a disturbance near the outer gates. There are unexpected visitors." Herethia's eyes narrowed. "Who are they?" The guard hesitated before speaking. "We are not sure, Your Majesty. They do not match any known species in our records, but they are heavily armed and aggressive." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "What are we going to do?" he asked, his voice tense. Herethia's face darkened. "This is no ordinary attack. These visitors, whoever they are likely part of the faction that opposes my rule. The rebels who believe that you are an imposter." The word rebels echoed in Daniel's mind. It was the last thing he wanted to deal with, but it seemed unavoidable. His presence here was threatening to tear apart everything Herethia had worked for. Herethia turned to the guard. Prepare the defenses. We cannot allow them to breach the palace. As the guard hurried away, Sarathia's eyes lingered on Daniel. This is not just about me, Caro. They want to destroy everything we have fought for. And if they succeed, they will also erase your past and our future. Daniel swallowed hard, a sense of responsibility rising within him. He still didn't know if he truly was Caro, but there was one thing he did know. He couldn't stand by while Sarathia's world crumbled around her. Let's fight then, Daniel said, his voice firm. If they want to destroy everything, we'll make sure they don't succeed. Sarathia gave him a long, searching look before nodding. Very well, Caro, she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. We face this together. As they moved toward the palace's command center, Daniel's heart raced. Whatever was coming for them, he was ready to face it. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that there were even greater dangers hidden within the shadows of this empire, and that the real test was still ahead. The palace shook as distant explosions echoed through the halls. Daniel could feel the ground vibrate beneath his feet, the force of the attack becoming more intense with each passing moment. He stood at the center of the command room, his mind racing as he tried to process everything happening around him. Zarathia, calm yet determined, moved swiftly between her advisors and soldiers, giving orders as if she had done this countless times before. Her voice was steady, her presence powerful. Daniel watched her, feeling a mix of admiration and confusion. She was a queen, no doubt, but the connection between them, the one she was so sure of, still felt distant, like a fog in his mind that wouldn't lift. He had followed her to the command center, where the outer gates were under heavy assault. Zarathia's guards were holding their ground, but the rebels outside were relentless, determined to tear down the palace walls. Daniel could hear the faint hum of alien weapons firing, mixed with the shouts of soldiers and the clash of metal. Zarathia, Daniel called, stepping closer to her as she looked over the battle plans. How did you know I would be the one to return? How could you be so sure? Zarathia didn't look up immediately. She was absorbed in the reports coming in from the outer walls. I knew you would come back to me, Caro, she said softly, as if the answer was simple. The bond we shared, our bond. It is not something that can be erased by time or distance. Even if you do not remember now, I believe in you. I believe in us. Daniel clenched his fists, frustration building. But I don't remember anything. He snapped. I don't know who I am, who you are, or why any of this is happening. How can you just expect me to believe all this? Zarathia finally looked up at him, her eyes filled with understanding. I do not expect you to remember, Caro. I know it is difficult. But there is a way to unlock your memories, a way to awaken what has been hidden. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? How can I remember something I've never experienced? She stepped closer to him, her voice barely above a whisper. There is a place deep within the palace, a hidden chamber. It holds the memories of our past. The relics there can awaken what you have forgotten. But the path is dangerous. It is not a journey for the faint of heart. Daniel hesitated. He didn't want to walk into some ancient, dangerous chamber and risk his life for memories he wasn't even sure were his. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this was the only way to truly understand what was happening. The rebels, the palace under siege, Sarathia's insistence. Everything was tied to his past, and he needed answers. Lead the way, he said, his voice resolute. Zarathia nodded, a look of relief crossing her face. She turned and motioned for one of her trusted guards to follow them. The palace was eerily quiet now, the sounds of the battle fading as they descended deeper into the heart of the building. The hallway they walked through was narrow, the walls lined with ancient symbols and carvings that seemed to shift as they passed. Daniel couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding, like they were walking into a place that had been untouched for centuries. He felt as if the very air around him was charged with energy, as if the past was waiting for him to unlock it. Finally, they reached a large door made of stone, carved with symbols that glowed faintly. Xerathia placed her hand on the door, and it opened slowly with a heavy creak. Inside was a room filled with relics, strange artifacts, weapons, and devices Daniel couldn't even begin to understand. At the center of the room was a pedestal with a small, glowing orb resting on it. "This is it," Xerathia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is where your memories lie." Daniel stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment. He reached out for the orb, his fingers trembling slightly. As soon as his hand touched it, a surge of energy coursed through him, and the room around him seemed to blur. Visions flooded his mind, alien battles, a woman with silver skin by his side, the echoes of a forgotten war, and a bond that stretched across time. It was all too much. He gasped for breath as his knees buckled, and the world went black. In the darkness, he heard Xerathia's voice calling his name, soft and distant. "Caro, remember." Daniel's eyes snapped open, and for a moment, he didn't know where he was. His chest rose and fell rapidly as he gasped for air, his mind reeling from the overwhelming flood of memories. The visions were still swirling in his mind. Alien battles, moments of tenderness with Xerathia, and an endless feeling of loss. He could feel the weight of those memories pressing down on him, as though they had been buried for centuries, just waiting to break free. "Daniel." Xerathia's voice echoed in his ears, soft but urgent. "Are you all right?" He blinked, trying to focus. Slowly, his surroundings came into view. The dimly lit chamber filled with relics, the glowing orb still resting on its pedestal. Xerathia was kneeling beside him, her eyes full of concern. I saw things," Daniel said, his voice hoarse. "I saw battles. I saw you. I saw us." Xerathia's face softened, a flicker of hope shining in her eyes. You remember now, Caro." Daniel's heart pounded. The memories were real. He could feel them deep within him. He was Caro. He had been by Xerathia's side, leading her people in an ancient war, fighting to protect her and the Empire. But something was wrong. The memories weren't just of love and loyalty. There was betrayal too. Something dark, something hidden. "I remember," Daniel whispered, still trying to make sense of the chaos in his mind. "But I also feel something else. Something isn't right. There's a shadow in those memories." Xerathia's expression hardened slightly, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she helped Daniel to his feet. "It's the past, Caro. We've both suffered through it. The bond we shared is what will carry us forward." Before Daniel could respond, there was a loud crash from the entrance of the chamber. The door flew open, and a group of Xerathia's elite guards burst in, weapons drawn. At the head of the group was General Vorthan, the stern-faced advisor who had always seemed distant and distrustful. Xerathia's face darkened. "What is this, Vorthan?" she demanded, her voice cold with authority. Vorthan stepped forward, his eyes filled with determination. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing slightly, "it is time to face the truth. This human cannot be Caro. He is an imposter." Daniel's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" he asked, stepping forward, his voice shaking with confusion. "I am Caro. I've seen the memories. I felt it." Vorthan shook his head slowly. "No, the real Caro died in the final battle. His body was never recovered. But this one, this imposter, has been playing us all. He's been manipulating you, Your Majesty, all along." Xerathia's eyes widened in shock. "No, you lie," she cried, stepping forward to stand beside Daniel. "This is Caro. He is my consort. I know him." The guards behind Vorthan looked uncertain, but the general's voice remained steady. "I am only trying to protect you, Your Majesty. This human does not belong here. He is a threat to everything we've worked for." Daniel felt a surge of anger. "You're wrong," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. I'm not an imposter. I'm the one who fought for you, who fought for us. Don't let him twist the truth." But Xerathia hesitated. She turned to him, her eyes full of doubt. "Vorthin's words carry weight. His loyalty has always been unquestioned. Perhaps you are not who you think you are." The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. Xerathia, the queen he had fought for, the woman who had believed in him for so long, was now questioning him. He could see the doubt in her eyes. The bond they shared, was it truly enough to overcome the seeds of distrust that were now growing between them? Xerathia's voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "I want to believe you, Caro. But if what Vorthin says is true, if you are not who you claim to be, then everything we fought for, everything, is a lie." Daniel's heart shattered. He had given everything for her, for this empire, and now it was all slipping through his fingers. In that moment, he realized the true cost of this war, the trust he had placed in the wrong people. Before he could respond, Vorthin turned to his guards. "Take them both. We will decide their fate in front of the council." As the guards moved forward to seize them, Daniel knew one thing for sure. Betrayal was not just from within the palace. It was from the very person he had fought so hard to protect. And now, it was too late to turn back. Daniel stood in the cold, dimly lit cell, his mind racing with confusion and anger. The guards had thrown him and Xerathia into separate cells, the heavy iron doors slamming shut behind them. The once great queen, now trapped and uncertain, was just a shadow of her former self in Daniel's eyes. The rebellion, the betrayal, the growing distrust, it had all turned the world they had known upside down. His chest tightened as he thought back to Xerathia's words. "Perhaps you are not who you think you are." The doubt in her voice was enough to shatter the last of his resolve. How could she have turned against him so quickly? How could she doubt him after everything they had shared? But as the moments dragged on, Daniel knew there was no time for self-pity. The palace was in chaos. The rebels, led by General Vorthin, were seizing control, and Xerathia's throne was slipping away. There had to be a way to stop it, to prove he was Caro, to remind Xerathia that the bond they had was real. He paced the small cell, his mind working quickly. There was no way out unless he could reach Xerathia, convince her that he was truly her consort, and that their future was worth fighting for. But first, he needed to escape. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing louder. Daniel stiffened, straining to hear. He pressed his ear against the cool metal of the cell door, his breath shallow. He could hear the low murmur of voices, and then the unmistakable sound of the lock turning. The door creaked open, and a guard stepped inside. His expression was unreadable, but the way he held his weapon suggested this wasn't a friendly visit. "You're to come with me," the guard said, his voice flat and emotionless. Daniel swallowed hard, his mind quickly calculating his options. He had to move now. There was no time to waste. With a burst of strength, he lunged forward, knocking the guard off balance. The guard stumbled back, his weapon falling to the ground with a clang. Daniel grabbed it before the guard could recover, aiming it at him. "Tell me where she is," Daniel demanded, his voice low and intense. The guard's eyes widened with surprise, but he quickly regained his composure. "You'll never reach her. The queen's fate is already sealed." Daniel clenched his jaw. "I'm not asking for her fate. I'm asking where she is." The guard hesitated, clearly unsure whether to comply. "The throne room. But it's too late. Vorthin has already taken control." Daniel didn't wait for another word. He rushed past the guard, pushing open the cell door and running down the hall. His heart raced as he moved through the palace, the familiar corridors now feeling like a maze. The sounds of the battle outside grew louder, the shouts of soldiers and the clash of weapons filling the air. He reached the throne room just as the doors burst open. There, standing before Xerathia, was General Vorthin, his back to Daniel. The queen was kneeling, her head bowed in submission, her expression hollow. "Xerathia," Daniel shouted, his voice filled with urgency. Vorthen turned quickly, a sneer on his face. "You're too late, human," he said coldly. "This is over." Sarathia's eyes flicked up, meeting Daniel's. For a moment, their gazes locked, and time seemed to freeze. She looked so small, so lost, in that moment. The doubt was still there in her eyes, but there was something else, something faint but real. It was a flicker of hope. Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You know who I am, Exarethia. I'm Caro. I'm your Caro. I fought for you once. I will fight for you again." Exarethia slowly rose to her feet, her expression unreadable. Vorthen's face twisted with anger, and he raised his weapon, aiming it directly at Daniel. "Enough," he roared. "You will never rule this empire. It belongs to me now." Daniel didn't hesitate. He charged at Vorthen, tackling him to the ground. The weapon flew from the general's hands, skidding across the floor. Daniel held Vorthen down, breathing heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. "Your fight is with me," Daniel growled, his eyes locking with Vorthen's. Exarethia stepped forward, her eyes fierce with determination. "This is my kingdom, and you will not destroy it." With one swift motion, she raised her hand, signaling to the guards who had been standing in the background. They moved quickly, surrounding Vorthen and binding him with energy restraints. "I trusted you," Exarethia said coldly, her voice echoing through the throne room. "And you betrayed me." Vorthen said nothing, his eyes burning with hatred. But it was over. Daniel stood beside Exarethia, the weight of their shared history now between them. The battle wasn't over, but it was a victory. Together, they had stopped the rebellion, and now they could rebuild. "We fight together," Daniel said quietly, his voice filled with a new sense of purpose. The palace was silent, but the tension in the air was thick. Daniel stood beside Exarethia, her hand resting on his arm, both of them gazing out over the battle-scared courtyard. The rebellion had been crushed, but the cost had been great. The walls of the palace were damaged, and the once thriving city outside had been torn apart by the fighting. Even so, Exarethia stood tall, her face resolute, as though the weight of her responsibility had somehow made her even stronger. Behind them, the throne room was in chaos. Vorthen had been taken into custody, but his betrayal had left a deep scar in Exarethia's heart. She had trusted him, once, and now she had lost not only her advisor, but also her peace of mind. Daniel could see it in her eyes, the lingering doubt, the pain that still lingered beneath her regal composure. She had to rebuild her empire, but it seemed like rebuilding herself would be just as difficult. "Do you think they'll ever truly accept me?" Exarethia asked, her voice quiet, almost unsure. Her gaze was focused on the distant horizon, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. Daniel turned to her, taking a step closer. "They'll have to. You're their queen. And now you've shown them your strength. The people will follow you, Exarethia. They've seen what you're capable of." Exarethia shook her head slowly. "It's not just about strength. They've seen how quickly I've been betrayed. How can I lead them if they doubt me? If they think I was weak enough to fall for Vorthen's lies?" Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, turning her to face him. "It's not your fault. Vorthen was a traitor. But now you're stronger because you've seen the truth. The people will understand that." Exarethia looked at him, her eyes softening. For a moment, there was a flicker of hope in them. "And what about you, Caro? Do you still believe in me?" Daniel felt a surge of emotion. He had fought for her, yes, but there was more than that. He remembered their past, their bond. Despite the doubts and confusion, something inside him still knew that he was meant to be by her side. He had seen the truth in the ethereal diadem. He had seen their history, how they had once stood together as partners, not just in battle but in life. "I never stopped believing in you," Daniel said, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "We've been through too much, Exarethia. The past doesn't define us. What matters is what we do next. Zerathia smiled softly, a weight lifting from her shoulders. You're right. We can't change the past, but we can change the future. As they stood together, side by side, Daniel felt the first stirrings of something else, something deeper than just duty. There was a connection between them that went beyond the memories, beyond the battles. It was a bond that had survived centuries, and it had survived betrayal. We'll rebuild, Zerathia said, her voice stronger now, more confident. We'll rebuild this kingdom together, Caro. We'll show them who we truly are. Daniel nodded. Together. Just then, a messenger arrived, breathless and hurried. Your Majesty, the messenger said, bowing low. The people outside the palace are waiting. They want to see you. Zerathia glanced at Daniel, then back at the messenger. What do they want? They want to hear from you. They want to know that the palace is secure. They want to know that you're still their queen. Zerathia straightened, her posture regal once again. The weight of the crown was still heavy on her, but now she seemed ready to face it. With a determined look, she nodded. Let's go, she said to Daniel, her voice full of purpose. It's time to show them that I am still their queen. And we will rebuild, together. As they walked toward the gates of the palace, the people gathered below began to cheer, their voices rising in a wave of support. The battle was over, but the real work was just beginning. Daniel and Zerathia had come through the storm, and together they would rebuild not just a kingdom, but the trust that had been shattered by betrayal. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be challenges, and there would be more battles to fight. But for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt a sense of certainty. They were stronger than ever, and no matter what the future held, they would face it together. The sun was setting over the once war-torn kingdom, casting a warm golden glow across the city. Daniel stood at the balcony of the palace, looking out over the horizon. The streets below were filled with people, their voices rising in hopeful unity. The sound of laughter, the clink of metal from the rebuilding efforts, and the soft hum of life returning to normal filled the air. It was a stark contrast to the chaos and fear that had gripped the palace just days ago. Beside him stood Zerathia, her gaze soft as she took in the view. She was no longer the woman who had once carried the heavy burden of the throne alone. No longer the queen who doubted herself. She had reclaimed her place, her strength renewed by the trials they had faced together. And Daniel had played a part in that. He had fought beside her, believed in her when others doubted. We've come so far, Zerathia said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of everything they had been through. It feels like a lifetime ago that I was standing in the throne room, wondering if I'd ever see the light of day again. Daniel turned to look at her, his heart full. The woman he had once thought a stranger, the woman who had called him her long-lost husband, had become so much more than that. She was his partner, his queen, and his closest ally. They had faced betrayal, confusion, and war. But now they were standing together, stronger than ever. Your people are proud of you, Daniel said. They see your strength, your heart. They see the real Zerathia. Zerathia smiled softly, the weight of the crown feeling lighter than ever. And I see you, Caro. You've been my anchor through all of this. I couldn't have done it without you. Daniel felt a rush of warmth at her words. It was true. He had stood by her through everything. And in return, she had shown him a side of the galaxy he had never known. A side full of danger, passion, and unbreakable bonds. But what now? Daniel asked, his voice thoughtful. What comes next for us? Zerathia's gaze drifted over the people below, her face reflecting both the weight and the hope of her future. We rebuild, she said simply. We rebuild the trust of my people. We restore what was lost. And we do it together. Daniel nodded. He knew their journey wasn't over. There would always be challenges ahead. Rebuilding an empire would take time, and trust could not be restored overnight. But with each step forward, they would grow stronger, and together, They would face whatever came their way. A soft knock at the door interrupted their moment of peace. The royal advisor entered, a small smile on his face. "Your Majesty, the council is waiting for you," he said respectfully. "They are eager to hear your plans for the future." Tirethia nodded and turned to Daniel. "Shall we?" she asked, her eyes bright with purpose. Daniel offered her a small smile, feeling the weight of their shared journey and the hope for the future. "Lead the way." Together, they walked through the halls of the palace, a sense of unity between them. The palace, once filled with betrayal and uncertainty, now felt like a place of hope. Tirethia had reclaimed her throne, and with Daniel by her side, she would lead her people into a new era. As they entered the council room, the murmurs of the advisors quieted, and all eyes turned to Tirethia. She stood tall, her confidence restored, ready to face the challenges ahead. Daniel stood beside her, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he felt certain of one thing: they were ready. The empire would rise again, stronger, united, and guided by the unbreakable bond between them.